For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. Executive Director at CDE and Bernstein discusses their latest report titled 10 Million and Rising, What It Would Take to Address South Africa's Jobs Bloodbath. So, and you say that the underlying issues in your report is that our government has failed to address the underlying causes of unemployment. Can you briefly outline those for us?
The most important cause of unemployment in South Africa is that we have and have had low growth. So people like to talk about jobs as though they come from somewhere else. Jobs come from growth. That's the most important thing. And unless we have much faster growth, South Africa will not get more and more jobs. But even if we got faster growth, the nature of the South African economy and the policy choices government has made means that we get fewer and fewer unskilled jobs. So we encourage subsidies to capital intensive activity. We pay for machines and technology, and we only have one subsidy for encouraging employers to hire workers. So we have to get faster growth, and we have to change the nature of our labour market, reform things so that we open up space for much more labour-intensive employment and growth.
So, and the report says more recent policy choices have deepened the unemployment crisis. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the last decade, we've gone from 6.5 million people who are unemployed to 10.3 million today and rising. This is a devastating number. And in the last decade, what we've done is we've had job summits, we've had presidential summits, we've had projects that people talk about and all sorts of special initiatives. But we've avoided the root causes of why we have such high unemployment, probably the deepest in the world. And those root causes are policy related. They all sorts of decisions that we've made that have prevented faster growth. In fact, we have almost no growth now. The South African Reserve Bank has had to reduce downwards its estimated growth for the last 5 years. So we're not making the big choices, which are hard, needed to get faster growth. We're not listening to investors on what they need in order to risk their money, to expand their factory or to put new money into South Africa. In addition, we continue to make the employer-employee relationship one that is bound by all sorts of rules and regulations. And so if I want to hire a young, inexperienced, unskilled person, not through any fault of their own, but because they came out of a bad school and they come from a community where very few people work, so they're a big risk. Will they work out? It's hard to do that because I know it's going to be costly and expensive to get rid of them if they don't work out. Now, it's in the employer's interest for that relationship to work, but we have to fix that employer-employee relationship, and we also have to fix what is the price of young, unskilled labour. So we've been pushing up the price of labour, which is out of kilter with their productivity. So employers are less and less keen to hire people, and especially in a low growth economy. So high regulation, low growth, high costs, why am I going to take a risk and employ somebody? So all these things make South Africa an economy where employers are not hiring in the context of mass unemployment.
And don't you think that the SA's high unemployment rate also has deep structural roots?
Like, absolutely. Yeah. I'm pleased you raised that. So you have to think about our history of apartheid, where we deliberately failed to create a skilled workforce, and we've prevented black South Africans from accumulating capital and access to the city and access to everything that you and I know about. And dispossessed people. That's a big factor in our history. But since we've become a democracy, we haven't done very well. We have opened things up, but we haven't change the nature of our cities. We create far more jobs in our cities than in our rural areas. That's good. We need to, and we know that we're an urbanizing society. We need to make our cities places that are hospitable to people who've got so little, okay? And we have to make them hospitable to firms, to new firms, small firms, make it easy for them to expand, for them to set up, for them to fail. Most new firms fail. That's okay. You learn from that and you start again. But if you're locked into a tight employee relationship, this makes it very costly. So there are lots of structural reasons we have to think about in South Africa. And yes, we also, because of our history, we have very low rates of employment in agriculture. That makes us very unusual in the developing world. Now we have to understand that, and we have to then say, where are we going to get more jobs? And we mustn't dream about, people keep saying, oh, Anne wants more and more urbanization, but what about the rural areas? The fact is it's hard to create jobs where investors don't want to go. They will go to some small rural areas. They might find mining, but mining is increasingly capital intensive. We're getting fewer and fewer jobs from the mining sector, and agriculture is less and less labor intensive. So we need to, I think the key point South Africa, that CDE is making, is we're saying 10.3 million people and rising, nearly 39% of our workforce who are unemployed, people who want to work, who cannot find jobs. This is a massive indication of failure. And what it requires is for all of us to rethink root causes. We have to say, how did we get here? What are the root causes? And be ruthlessly honest. Then we have to say, what do we need to do? And then how are we going to implement what are politically challenging reforms, both with respect to faster growth and with respect to labor market reform?
You also criticize the impasse created by endless workshops, job summits, as we've seen before. What do you suggest should be done by government?
So South Africa has used summits and workshops and, oh, isn't this a wonderful project? And there are many good projects. We're not saying they should stop, but we are saying stop avoiding the issues. Stop fiddling, stop tweaking, stop saying, oh, this is too hard, so we're not going to discuss it. Well, it's hard, but it's fundamental to how we move the dial. That's the big challenge. We should stop talking so much, and we should actually say, avoiding reform is the wrong approach, and that is partly what has got us into this very difficult situation. We can't fix it overnight, but we can design a strategy for reform and the politics of reform and manage a successful process to get faster growth and to get more people into the labor market. And we're not saying we should attack the rights of unionized workers who fought so hard to get those wages and benefits. We're not saying that. We're saying we have to redefine the notion of worker in South Africa to also include millions of unemployed people who want to be workers. And we need to calibrate the reforms of the labor market so that we don't undermine the benefits and wages of people who've just got out of poverty and who are unionized workers, but we have to find ways to open things up to people who don't have jobs, to get in at the bottom rungs of the economy and to then go up.
And the report also says that providing support to the unemployed members of society now makes everyone poor. Can you please elaborate on that?
Well, this is an important point. What happens when you have larger and larger numbers of people who are unemployed is that employed people, the family, the community, has to help them. So it makes it harder for people with jobs to move into the middle class, to be self-standing, because their younger brothers and sisters and cousins and others you have to support, and society has to support. So we've got to look at what are the real costs of all these millions of people who are unemployed, to the individual, to the family, to the household, to the community, to our society. We also have to understand that the longer you stay out of employment, the harder it is. So you get a job and you learn new skills. You've got know-how now of how to operate in your working environment. You get new networks, you learn new skills, and you can take them to your next job if you want to move. Now, I'm unemployed. Firstly, I don't have a job. And secondly, I'm not getting the know-how, the networks, the discipline of work, all the things employed people get. I'm not getting any of those things. And then my skills deteriorate. If you don't use them, you don't move forward. So it gets worse and worse. So we have to understand that employment helps create employability, and unemployment, a multi-generational crisis of unemployment, disadvantages, excludes the unemployed more and more and more as time goes on. And that's why CDE is saying we have to do something. We have to get people into the labor force. Even if it's not a fabulous job, you're inexperienced, you're unskilled, yes, you will get a low-wage job, but that's the first step. We're not saying that's the last step. And if you look at countries elsewhere in the world, which are much more labor-intensive, many developing countries have got millions of people out of rural poverty, out of deep misery, really, into a first job, making my T-shirt, and then slowly making your beautiful shirt more complicated, then men's shirts, which are more complicated. They're ladders, they're little ladders you can go up. And it gives women, disproportionately involved in the making clothes, gives them more empowerment. They're earning their own money. And they're generally not seeing this as terrible exploitation. They're saying, gee, how do I get your job? What do you do? Can I manage other people making T-shirts? And so South Africa's denying people that whole experience. In our view, a low-wage job is a better first step than no job at all. And that's the starting point. We're saying you've got to think differently about all of this. Otherwise, we just carry on doing what we're doing. And we have another job summit when not very much happens. We've got to think about how we're going to get millions of jobs. Not a few hundred or a few thousand, but millions of jobs in time.
What was interesting in the report is also the number of adults who have given up now looking for work, that it has risen from 6.5 million to 10.3.
No, they haven't given up looking for work. So the 10.3 million people are people who are looking for work now, and people who were looking more than 2 weeks ago. They want work. So they're not giving up looking. We're saying that the right figure to think about in terms of South Africa's crisis is the expanded figure of 10.3 million and rising every day.
So President Cyril Ramaphosa has been trying to attract investors since he took over the presidency, but the numbers keep dropping. Do you think that he can succeed with this objective?
How can you attract investment if you're attacking property rights? So the president has appointed investment ambassadors and has tried hard to get new investment, but at the same time, the ruling party that he is head of wants to undermine property rights and put more and more obstacles in the way of people starting new firms and expanding. So this is a contradiction. We need to stop listening to the words. We need to start thinking about the general thrust of what's been happening over the last 2 years. He is trying to reform on state capture, but we've yet to see anybody senior be charged, never mind go to jail. So you can't take forever on this, and then you can't attract new investment if South Africa keeps adopting policies that are anti-growth. So again, you can't talk about jobs and the unemployment crisis in isolation. You have to say How do we get more growth in South Africa, and what reforms are needed, and what must we stop doing? We need a fundamentally new attitude to the role of business and firms and competitive markets in our economy. We need to think about the size of the state. We can't keep saying, oh, we're going to have a state-owned bank and now we're going to have a state-owned new energy company when the old one is crippling the economy. So we have to have a serious debate about what kind of state South Africa has today, which is a very weak, failing state. And we have to be realistic about what's possible. I want a capable, professional state that understands how to regulate markets so we can be a more competitive economy. But why must the state run all sorts of things when it's shown how incredibly bad it is at that? So we have to put the jobs crisis in context of how we get growth and a whole lot of big questions about reform, and also a whole lot of big questions about how we make this an economy that is much more conducive to small firms and new firms starting and their ability to hire and fire much more easily. And we must stop pushing up the price of labor without any relationship to productivity. All of this in the context of massive unemployment.
And lastly, and if I may ask, what are you hoping this report will do?
Well, first and foremost, we hope more and more people like yourselves and others will be talking about the scale of the unemployment crisis. And it's not just a small thing. It's not something that little projects can fix. It's really, really deep, and it's getting worse. So we want to raise people information in the society. We want to raise the debate about how to deal with the scale of unemployment. And we want to engage with all sorts of people with power in our society on, so how do we fix it? And to all those people who might disagree with CDE, we're saying that's fine. What is your response to the scale of this unemployment crisis? What are your ideas? We have some very practical ideas. We're saying, in addition to all the reforms we want for growth and more labor intensity, let's try out a special economic zone that really is special. We could do it in Coega or next to Coega in Nelson Mandela Bay, where we've already put public money. We do not want subsidies. All we want is to try and create a special economic zone to attract labor-intensive manufacturing for export. And we want the employment tax incentive expanded to more people and for a longer time. Let's try. That's our suggestion. Let's give it a try. And maybe other people have other suggestions. Let's try those. But we have to go for scale. We have to change the way our economy operates. Otherwise, you and I are going to sit here in a year's time and things will be worse.
That was Executive Director at CDE, Bernstein, speaking to Crema Media's Polity about their recent report on unemployment.